following is a presentation of the Women's Football Alliance.
If you missed any of the action last weekend, you may have missed one of the best games of the season on the road to Canton. Welcome to the Road to Canton. I'm your host, Brian Sweeney, the voice of the Women's Football Alliance Pro Division National Championship game. Alex Westhead is back again this week in studio, but before we get his thoughts on the games, let's look back at the Week 2 scores and highlights. The Dallas Elite Mustangs opened up their 2024 season with a decisive win when they outscored the Zydeco Spice of Division III 38-8. The Cali War also started 2024 with a win at home when they handed the Central Valley Chaos of Division III a 34-0 loss. The Houston Energy moved to 500 on the season with a 34-6 win over Division II's Austin Outlaws. After a 1-point loss last season in the Division II National Conference Championship game, the Baltimore Nighthawks of said division got their revenge by handing the now Pro Division New York Wolves their first loss in almost 5 years, shutting them out 41-0. Alex, we don't usually spend too much time on inter-division contests, but I know you have something to say about this game.
Well, and I think it's, when you look at New York and Baltimore, this was one of the games that we watched in terms of New York has said that they're ready to make the jump to the big time for their entirety of the time last year in Division II and now in WFA Pro. They haven't played a big dog in the WFA Pro level yet. And I think if you look at this result, 41-0, it's one thing if it's on the road in Baltimore in the Beltway. This is at home. And for a team with championship aspirations that likes to talk about how well their offense is run, how well their defense is run, it's a team that gave up 41 at home to a Baltimore Nighthawk team that, credit to Baltimore, they were arguably a half away from making it to Canton, Ohio last year. But this is a result that's curious for New York, to say the very least, because when you look at who they have left on their schedule, they get Pittsburgh, they get Boston in their next 2 games. And all of a sudden, that margin for error shrinks down significantly in terms of what the New York Wolves had and what they have available to them. And this is a head-scratcher, to say the very least.
I want to personally apologize for a mistake I made last week when I failed to notice that there were actually 3 games of the week. This apology goes out to the Pittsburgh, Passion, and DC Divas fan base, staff, and players. Now, let's look at this game. In this game, the Pittsburgh Passion improved to 2-0 on the season when they beat the Divas 54-29. Alex, your thoughts on this game?
Well, I think when you look at Pittsburgh and DC, this was a matchup that a year ago really spelled the end for what Pittsburgh had available to them. But you look at where it stands now. We talked about Pittsburgh, their depth, and what the opportunities they had, if healthy. This is proof positive of that. I know that Teresa Cohen might be upset that we didn't talk about her team on last week's edition of Road to Canton. Same too for Rich Daniels. But at the end of the day, this is a team in the Pittsburgh Passion that has a very high ceiling behind them. Having played 2 games now, both against WFA Pro opponents, this Pittsburgh Passion team is ready. They are capable. They score a ton of points, and they keep the ball out of the end zone. There's a lot of good things to like about here with Pittsburgh. For the DC Divas, again, their question has been what it's been for a number of years now. How do you continue to stop defenses? Because when you play Boston frequently, now Pittsburgh has their offense rolling at full swing. How do you keep the ball out of the end zone? That's a question for DC the rest of the year. Their schedule doesn't get any easier, but if they can figure out a way to stop teams from scoring and not have it be a slugfest every time they take the football field, DC might have a good chance even as the season wears on.
Yes. And in the second game of the week, the Boston Renegades gave their home crowd something to cheer for as they moved to 2-0 by beating the Alabama Fire by a final score of 56-6. Alex, did you see anything in this game that would lead you to believe that Alabama can still turn this season around?
I think that there's a lot to like out of what Alabama showed, but again, a week ago in my classroom in South St. Paul, Minnesota, I said that success for Alabama was scoring points of any kind against Boston. They did exactly that. Granted, it was in a late possession situation, but still points of any kind against the Boston Renegades proves to be critical for them moving forward. The big thing, though, is this. Boston, 2 weeks now, they've shown great offensive prowess. They've shown great defensive prowess. But on the offensive side, they've done this without Allison Cahill. She has yet to take a snap. She has yet to make any impact on the football field whatsoever. And if you are missing your greatest, arguably, your greatest offensive asset behind Adrian Smith, behind the three-headed monster running back crew that they have, I mean, watch out. Because as soon as Cahill comes back, if she comes back, this again, we always talk about the gap between Boston and everybody else. That gap continues to get wider as the Renegades show their depth, as they did so far through 2 games this season.
The third game of the week has already been called the greatest game of the season, despite the fact that there's still 6 weeks left to play in the WFA Pro Division. The Minnesota Vixen welcomed the St. Louis Slam to town. This game was a back-and-forth fight until the very end, when Minnesota, down by 1 point, went for the win instead of the tie. The attempt was unsuccessful and allowed the Slam to leave Minnesota with the 41-40 win. Alex, I talked to a few of the staff on the Minnesota Vixen after this game, and they wanted me to personally let you know that they are here to play in 2024. Your thoughts on this game?
Well, and this is a game I was supposed to do the play-by-play call on, but then Minnesota United, the Major League Soccer, came calling instead. I think the big thing that you look at with this game, and yes, this is a shout-out to Michelle Braun, the great offensive line coach for the Minnesota Vixen, and one of the original Minnesota Vixen, one of the longest tenured players in women's professional football. Yeah, this team's ready to play. In terms of, we talked last week about the head-to-head rivalry that they have with the St. Louis Slam and how those matchups, one way or the other, they've never really been close, except for a postseason matchup in 2019 and then a weather-shortened matchup in 2022. These teams have never been close. And that's a big thing that we saw here, where when St. Louis punched, Minnesota had to punch back. When the defense made a stop, the defense made a stop on the other side. It was the most entertaining game in the 5 years, now 6 years that I've been part of the Women's Football Alliance. Minnesota and St. Louis, it's the most exciting game between the two that I've seen. I love the decision to go for 2 points. I sat there in the studio and I said, I love this decision because for Connor Jo Lewis in her first year, you want to make an impact and you want to make a statement early, be aggressive. That's exactly what they did by going for 2 on that opportunity, because you have to. And you talked before we started recording this program. A 1 point loss versus a 1 point win doesn't make that much of a difference, especially in the Massey ratings, especially here at home. You're going to get St. Louis again in June, but it's a statement not just to St. Louis, it's a statement to the rest of the American Conference. Minnesota's here to play, and they have offensive power, they have offensive capability. It's just who's going to shut them out the rest of the way, and how does the 2 games that they don't have in the Pro Division against Iowa and at home to Nebraska, how does that help them or how does that hurt them moving forward in the rest of the WFA season? Because St. Louis, guess what? They got Derby City coming up. They got Boston coming up. And that margin for error shrinks, and you look at that last week matchup, June 15th in St. Louis. You look at that matchup and you say, how important is that in terms of who's at home and who's on the road in the WFA playoffs? Because Minnesota had it last year against Cali in Los Angeles. We were on the call for that game. You look at it and you say, this is the most important game of the season in terms of setting the tone, which Minnesota did. The offense looks great under Connor Jo Lewis. The defense looks phenomenal as well, even though a high-flying St. Louis offense put 41 points on them. I'm excited for the Minnesota Vixen. They look fired up. They look ready to go. But so does St. Louis for that same reason.
I would agree. Last week, Lois Cook had everybody guessing what's going on with the coaches. Hopefully, she's got her answer in this week's segment of Low on the Go.
I'm back in my hometown and the reception is horrible. So, 2 weeks. I'll check my emails when I get to the internet cafe. Wish me luck. Hey! Hey!
Hey, you finally grew into your forehead.
Well, yeah, you finally know how to walk and chew gum?
Oh, we had some good times back in the day.
Yes. Do you still play football?
Yeah, I eat, sleep, breathe football.
I breathe, eat, football, sleep.
I eat, breathe, and sleep again football.
I eat, breathe, football, sleep.
I sleep, football, eat, breathe, football.
I football.
I breathe, football, sleep, eat.
I football, eat, breathe, sleep.
And I sleep, 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 eat, football, football, football. You should definitely come play football with us.
I would love to, but I have a lot of work to do, and I'm only here for 2 weeks.
What kind of work? It doesn't matter. We got 2 games. First one doesn't count, and the second one is the championship.
How is that possible?
Well, that's the only time we have for the show. So.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, I can't. I have a work assignment. But anyway, how's your mom doing? She used to let all the little girls play football on the football field.
Well, she passed last year.
I heard your voice today through the window pane.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
She left me her legacy, and now I get to let all the little girls play. So, what did you say you were doing here?
Nothing. Just a work assignment.
Well, just think about it. And when you know, I'll know, because then you can come try out for the football team.
All right. Bye.
After this short break, we will look at the Week 3 matchup. Now let's look at the Week 3 matchups. The 0-2 Alabama Fire look to get that elusive first win when they host the 1-0 Atlanta Rage of Division II. These two teams will meet again in 2 weeks and played each other twice last season, with Alabama winning both meetings. The 2-0 St. Louis Slam travel for the second straight week, this time to Kentucky, where they will face the 1-0 Derby City Dynamite of Division II. Last year, these two teams met twice, with the Slam winning both meetings by a combined score of 91-6. After a week off, the 0-1 Nevada Storm will welcome the 1-1 Wasatch Warriors of Division III. These two teams also met once last season, with Nevada coming out on top 48-6. And the 1-1 Houston Energy will travel for the first time this season to take on the 0-2 Zydeco Spice of Division III. These teams met once last season, with Houston coming out on top. Boston, Pittsburgh, and New York are on byes. And in the Pro versus Pro games of the week, the 0-1 DC Divas welcome the 0-1 Tampa Bay Inferno. These two teams met once last season, with DC coming out on top. Kickoff is set for 7 p.m. Eastern. Alex, does DC have a repeat of last season to move to 500 this season?
Well, I think that when you look at especially how DC did last week against Pittsburgh, DC should be the favorite here in this matchup. You and I, before we came on air, talked about Amanda Congliati and the opportunities that she has, and a lot of that stands with her offensive line play. Against Pittsburgh, she didn't have an opportunity truly to stay up, survey the field, and make throws until it was too late. I think against a Tampa Bay unit that has the ability, coming off of a bye last week, you have to be able to see what DC has offensively. The opportunities for national conference teams between Boston and Pittsburgh, those are going to be your number 1 and number 2. But everything beyond that is open. This is a good opportunity for DC to put themselves firmly in that driver's seat in terms of what they have for making that 3rd seed and 4th seed. You know that you're going to have to be on the road if you're not Boston or Pittsburgh, but you want to be able to go in and say, okay, well, let's go play at Pittsburgh. We like our chances against Pittsburgh. We played them. We had a great opportunity. And I think that taking a look at things head-to-head, DC and Tampa, DC has the better offense. The question is, do they have the better defense? And I think that when you look at it there, for once again, a great opportunity DC had last week. You're going to Tampa. This is a big must-win contest for you before the rest of your schedule gets tough. You get Baltimore in Division II, and yeah, they're a Division II team, but look at what they just did to New York. But then after that, you're at New York, Minnesota, Boston. That's a tough schedule for the DC Divas, arguably their toughest schedule in years, especially down the stretch here. And so I think that when you look at what they have the ability to do, this is a must-win game for DC. Even too for Tampa. This is another must-win game for Tampa. Candace Brady, who was Candace Pistol in years past, Candace Brady did a great job in managing the offense against Boston, but Boston did what Boston does. And you look at this game against DC, they get 2 games coming up against West Palm Beach, but then they have other games in pro division matchups that are scheduled for Tampa Bay. This is a game that you don't necessarily want to go get blown out of the water, but you have to be competitive in to be able to maintain your opportunities to make a playoff spot. It's one thing in the WFA to be able to say, okay, we had a great season. We won 3, we won 4, we won 5. But that doesn't matter if you're not making the playoffs. If you're not having an opportunity to contend for a championship, and yes, you have the gauntlet of Boston to deal with in the National League, you still have to be able to make the playoffs and have a reasonable, respectful run. This game is pivotal for both these teams. I like DC on paper once again, but in terms of the season for each of these teams, for the DC Divas and for the Tampa Bay Inferno, this game defines their season, because whoever wins will continue to surge in the back half of their schedule. Whoever loses, well, then all of a sudden you need to win out. And if you're not winning out, then that's going to be a very tough goal for you for the remainder of the season because of how important this game is on both sides.
After what was considered the best game this season, the 0-1 Minnesota Vixen looked to get a win when they welcomed the 1-0 Dallas Elite Mustangs. Game time is set for 6 p.m. Central. Alex, even after the loss last week, the Minnesota Vixen are playing some of the best football I've seen them play in the 10 seasons I've been part of that team. How's Dallas going to keep up with this new high-powered offense and stingy defense that the Minnesota Vixen is putting on the field?
Well, I think when you look at the Dallas Mustangs and you look at that history of that franchise, there's a lot of good things to look at as a team that was contending for national titles, as a team that was routinely, in terms of the state of Texas, one of the best teams in that state. Arlington Impact, again, not playing this year. And so you're getting talent from that Arlington team. You're taking them away from teams out of other leagues where the Dallas Mustangs have an opportunity to do something really special here. We've talked about in weeks past how wide open this American Conference is. St. Louis, Minnesota figured to be the favorites, but what happens with Cali? What happens Mile High? What happens with Nevada? There's a lot of questions in terms of who's going to be those teams that are right behind them in terms of making a playoff spot, because this conference, again, is wide open. This is a game for the Dallas Mustangs where if Dallas wants to establish themselves as a presence, this has to be it. They played the Division II Spice. They beat the Division II Spice, but they've also struggled against WFA Pro opponents historically. Look at how they performed against Houston a year ago. Look at how they performed 2 years ago. This has been a team that since making a national championship game against DC maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago now, it's a team that's really struggled to find success on the football field. And so my question is, in terms of Dallas, when do they start flipping the page? When do they start getting that results? This is one of the best ownership groups. It's one of the kindest ownership groups that I've ever come across. I remember last year in Canton, Ohio, the back of my shoe had, ripped out, and the ownership group of the Dallas Elite Mustangs said, "Hey, do you need some new shoes?" And it was the kindest thing that I'd seen. I know, it's weird, isn't it? It was the kindest thing that I'd ever seen out of the WFA.
First time I'm hearing this.
I know, yeah. It was last year after the WFA Pro game, but that's neither here nor there. We'll get back to that at a later tape. But I think that Dallas Elite Mustangs are in the right way. They're heading the right direction. They just need to start getting the results on the football field. This game here in Minnesota coming up this weekend is one of those opportunities for them to make a statement. Do they make a statement? I don't know. I don't think so. Because when you look at what Minnesota did, yes, my big talking point for Minnesota last week was quarterback Aaron Kelly. How was she going to do holding the football and throwing the football? A couple of miscues here and there, but nothing that we saw last year. And so I think that Aaron Kelly's made a step in the right direction. I think the ground game in Sarah Roche has made a step in the right direction. And between Amanda Dvorak in terms of her receptions, Jackie Radford had a great game against St. Louis last week. There's a lot to like about Minnesota on the offensive side of the ball. The questions that I had on the offensive and defensive line, those were answered. I mean, certainly against one of the best defensive and offensive line groups in St. Louis last week. You look at how Minnesota did head-to-head against them. Aaron Kelly had time to throw the football, and the Minnesota defensive line was pressuring Jamie Gall. That's all you can ask for. You had those questions, but how do you answer them? Minnesota did exactly that. My question again for Minnesota remains in their defensive backcourt. They gave up a lot of yards to a high-flying St. Louis offense. Is that something that Dallas can take advantage of if they start attacking laterally rather than going their historically strength ground-based game? And so the question is, if you can attack the offense through the air, go long, shoot long, can you take advantage of mismatches on Dallas's offense to Minnesota's defense? Well, we'll find out. But I think, again, Minnesota on paper, the only team that they have lost to at home since 2017, if not before that, in the WFA, was the St. Louis Slam. Dallas came here 2 or 3 years ago now to a game that was at Concordia St. Paul, and they were demolished at the hands of the Minnesota Vixen. I don't want to say that that's going to be the same result again, but with what Minnesota showed us on Saturday against St. Louis and what Dallas has yet to show us against WFA pro opponents this year, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a lopsided game. But then again, paper is not what determines games. Football determines games, as we've seen time and time again from Minnesota against St. Louis head-to-head, but also against other teams. You have to win the games on the football field, not on paper.
That's 100% accurate. We'll be right back after this to look at the third game of the week. Welcome back. And in the third game of the week, the 1-0 Mile High Blaze welcome the 1-0 Cali War. This game is set to start at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Alex, these two teams have put up a combined 83 points in 2 games this season. Who has the most firepower to outlast the other this weekend?
Well, and that's the big question. We've talked about in this head-to-head matchup between Cali and Mile High, where each of these teams have gotten opportunities to play. Cali's schedule historically has been weak because they play out in the Pacific time zone. They don't get the opportunity to play many teams. They play Nevada, they play Mile High, but they don't really play anybody else. So when you look at that game that they scored against Central Valley and the Chaos, a Division III team, you look for and say, oh, well, that's not significant. That's not significant. No, it's a win, right? Wins matter. And certainly right now in the Massey ratings, the Cali War would be in the playoffs. But again, you look at this matchup here and you say, in terms of last year, let's think about last year. When you had Cali and Minnesota in Los Angeles last year, that was a game for a home field in the opening round. And Minnesota, on a last-second interception by Tank Nelson, ultimately won that game for Minnesota, kept Minnesota at home, sent Cali on the road to St. Louis. This is a game with equal, if not just as much importance as that game last year, where for the Cali War, you look at the schedule they have the rest of the way. You're at Mile High this time, and yes, altitude's going to be a problem. It always is, again, certainly when you have teams that are going from outside of that high altitude up to the higher altitude. Your breath is thinner, your time to adjust to it takes long, and we've seen teams offensively struggle against Mile High because of that altitude. And certainly that's something to look at here, where Cali War, they have the offensive firepower. We know what they can do between their great offensive quarterback capabilities. Last year, we saw Tania Guzman and we saw Chantel Nino-Wiggins go back and forth alternating drives for the Cali War. They have 2 great quarterbacks. They've added some great offensive weapons here. Krishan Rock is one of them, a now at this point famous influencer on Instagram. So they have opportunities to really stretch that ball and make some great plays. The question just becomes, how do they contend against this Mile High defense? Because the Cali War hasn't seen any defense quite this strong since they played St. Louis in the opening round of the playoffs a year ago. And I'd like to say that Mile High has a chance to win this game, but the question they have is if Cali has not played an offense like the Mile High Blaze, well, Mile High hasn't played an offense like Cali in quite some time. And so my question with them again becomes, head-to-head, what wins out, the defensive strength of Mile High or the offensive strength of Cali? We know that Cali and the offensive power works well in the regular season, but in the postseason, it's on the defense. And so my question becomes, is how can Cali continue to attack Mile High defensively? Head-to-head, it's a matchup that has favored the Cali War more times than not. Mile High's gotten some results, but they haven't gotten enough results to be able to say, hey, we really dominate the Cali War. And so for Cali, a team that has longed to make it back to a national championship game. They haven't been there since 2019 in Atlanta, Georgia. This is an opportunity for them truly to make a statement and say to the rest of the league, it's not Minnesota, it's not St. Louis, it's Los Angeles and the Cali War. That's a team to look out for in the American Conference. This game defines both team seasons. Regardless of how it goes the rest of the way, Cali still gets Nevada. They still get Arizona Outcast, a very high-flying team in Division II. This is an opportunity for both teams to make a statement. We'll find out at the end of this game which team figures to be in that 3rd and 4th seed range. Because, again, what happens with Nevada? What happens with Dallas? There's so many great questions that if you look at the WFA a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, in the top flight of the pro division, there wasn't this much competitiveness. There wasn't this much parity. But now you look at it and you say, well, any team in the American Conference has a chance to do damage in the postseason. And so this game, even in week 3, this game in week 3 is massive. And so I'm excited for this game. It's going to be a great one. And I think that at the end of the day, Cali's offense will win out. But Mile High, if they can get a turnover, if they can get a short field opposition for the offense to be able to work with, it's a good opportunity for Mile High to have a chance in this game.
May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and it's something that I personally am very passionate about. Over the years, I've worked with more than one young athlete that has lost the battle with mental illness. If you are battling mental illness, please dial 988 from your phone and know that the person on the other end is there to listen and, more importantly, there to help. The season is already 25% in the books, and the action keeps getting hotter and the games better every week. For Lois Cook and Alex Westhead, I'm Brian Sweeney, and we'll see you next time on the road to Canton.
Thank you for watching the preceding presentation from the Women's Football Alliance.